Juliana just wanted to live her days like any other girl her age. Run barefoot, dream big, believe that the world was made only of discoveries and joys. Each afternoon seemed eternal, as if childhood would last forever. There was a sparkle in her eyes, there was hope. She didn't know that soon, everything she knew would fall apart. It was on an ordinary afternoon, like so many others, that life played a trick on her that was too harsh for her young age. A delay, a silent fear, a cheap test bought in a hurry. 2 red lines, small but huge in her soul. At 14, Juliana saw her world shatter without warning. It was the end of her innocence, and the beginning of a struggle she never imagined she would have to face. Fear took over. The butterflies in her stomach turned to despair. And the looks, judgmental, heavy, cruel. For others it was easy to point, comment, turn their faces away. For Juliana, each step was like carrying the weight of 1,000 guilts that weren't even hers. She, so young, so fragile, was forced to face the prejudice of a society that prefers to condemn rather than welcome. While her friends were still dreaming of parties and games, Juliana was learning the meaning of responsibility and sacrifice. There was no time to understand or to cry. The clock of her life accelerated without asking permission. Without a choice, she had to become a woman before she even stopped being a girl. And in the deepest solitude, she discovered strengths she never imagined she had. Today you will learn the true story of Juliana. A journey marked by pain, courage, and rebirth. A girl torn from her childhood, who, between tears and shy smiles, wrote her own story of resistance. This is not just a story about becoming a mother early. It is a story about surviving, about loving without limits, about never giving up. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That way you help us tell more stories that inspire and transform lives. I still remember exactly the day when everything began to change. It was a normal morning. The sun was streaming in through the small window of my room, and I should have been worrying only about my schoolwork. But there was something strange in my body, a silent discomfort that made me restless. I tried to ignore it, but the delay, which at first seemed like just a detail, began to scream inside me. In the first few weeks, I clung to any excuse to push away the fear. I told myself it was stress, that everything would work out. But each new day without an answer increased the anguish in my chest. I began to isolate myself, avoiding the gaze of my mother and friends, as if the secret was written all over my face and everyone could see it. When I finally plucked up the courage to buy the test, my heart felt like it was about to jump out of my mouth. I remember the sound of the plastic tearing, my trembling hands, the suffocating feeling of having nowhere to run. The 2 lines appeared quickly, relentlessly, like a verdict. At that moment, something inside me died, and something else, much heavier, was born. I wanted to disappear. I spent days locked in my room, pretending to be sick, making up excuses not to go out. The fear was so great that it paralyzed me. I thought 1,000 times about how to tell my mother, but no words seemed enough to explain what I could barely understand. Shame consumed me, as if I had failed at something without even knowing how. While my friends talked about parties, trips, and teenage dreams, I carried a secret that seemed to grow with every heartbeat. Every laugh I heard seemed distant, almost cruel. It was as if I had aged years in a few days, while the rest of the world continued to spin, oblivious to my pain. At school, I walked around with my head down, trying to hide my fear, hoping that no one would notice my change. The uniforms started to get tight, and with them the anxiety grew. At home, any comment about the future hurt like an open wound. I pretended to be interested in conversations, smiled when I needed to, but inside I felt broken. The nights were the worst. Lying in bed, with the dark ceiling as my only witness, I cried quietly so that no one could hear. I asked God what would become of my life, if there would be a way out, if I could still dream. The small room seemed to shrink, suffocating me, reminding me that from then on nothing would be the same. I started avoiding mirrors. I couldn't bear to look at myself and see the frightened girl hiding behind her swollen eyes. I felt an invisible weight crushing me, a responsibility that I hadn't chosen, but that was now part of me. Each new symptom was a painful reminder that there was no turning back. Over time, I had to make excuses to justify my tiredness, my lack of energy, my mood swings. With each innocent question, I felt my stomach churn, terrified that someone would suspect. I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to admit my fragility without seeming even more lost. Even though I was carrying everything alone, something different was beginning to grow inside me. A strange feeling, a mix of fear and love. I didn't understand what it was yet, but I felt that, despite all the pain, there was a small spark of hope. As if, deep down, a part of me believed that I could still find some light in the midst of that darkness. But the light was dim, almost fragile, and each day seemed threatened by new winds of fear. I felt lost in a labyrinth with no way out, stumbling between feelings I had never known. It wasn't just about me. Now there was another life at stake. A life that depended completely on my courage, my strength, my decision. It was scary to think that, in the eyes of the world, I was still just a child trying to figure out how to be an adult from one moment to the next. The first person I thought of telling was my best friend. However, every time I tried to open my mouth, the words died before they could be born. I saw her eyes, full of dreams and promises of a bright future, and I felt even more alone. How could I explain something that even I couldn't accept? How could I put into words a fear that seemed bigger than me? One cold Saturday afternoon, I made a decision. I grabbed an old notebook, sat on the floor of my room, and started writing a letter to my mother. I thought that maybe putting everything on paper would make it easier. The pen was shaking in my hand, and each word seemed to weigh a ton. I couldn't stop crying, tearing up one page after another, trying to find the right beginning for something that, in fact, had no beginning or end. In the end, I couldn't deliver any letter. I hid the notebook in the back of the closet, as if that could also bury the truth. I preferred silence, as if ignoring reality would postpone it. But inside me, the anguish grew like a living shadow, taking over every corner of my being, suffocating any shred of peace. Time passed, and with it my body changed more and more. I could no longer deny what was happening. One day, when I tried to put on my favorite pants and realized that they wouldn't go up anymore, I was overcome by a crying fit that seemed to have no end. I sat on the floor of my room and cried until I fell asleep, exhausted, hugging myself, as if I could protect myself from what was to come. My mother began to notice. Her gaze lingered on me longer. Her questions became more insistent. I could feel the worry growing between us, an invisible wall that separated us. Every gesture of hers, even the simplest, caused me panic. How could I confess? How could I break the heart of the person who loved me the most? Until the day came when there was no longer any way to hide. It was night, and the house was silent. My mother came into my room without knocking, as she sometimes did, just to wish me good night. I was sitting on the bed, staring into space, and when I saw her eyes in mine, something inside me collapsed. Without saying a word, I began to cry, sobbing like a frightened child. She ran to me, hugged me tightly, and I surrendered myself to that embrace like someone clinging to the last plank in a shipwreck. I didn't need to say anything at that moment. She knew. There was pain in her eyes, yes, but there was also love. A love that, for the first time in weeks, made me believe that perhaps I wasn't as alone as I imagined. That night, between tears and broken words, I told her everything. Every fear, every guilt, every shattered dream. And my mother, even with her heart broken, promised me that we would be together, that we would find a way to move forward. For the first time in a long time, I was able to sleep peacefully, knowing that, despite everything, there was still someone by my side. Life didn't promise to be easy from then on. I knew that we would face trials, difficulties, and sacrifices. But in that moment, hugging my mother, I learned that true love is made of this. Staying even when the world falls apart. And deep down I began to believe that somehow we would be strong enough to start over. The following days were a whirlwind of feelings that I could barely name. There were moments when I felt light, relieved that I no longer had to carry the secret alone. But there were also those when the weight of the future fell upon me like a storm, leaving me immobile, afraid of what was to come. My mother tried to be strong, but I could see in her eyes the sleepless nights, the heavy sighs, the tears that she hid so that I wouldn't see them. The conversations that had previously revolved around dreams and plans were now filled with worries, consultations, difficult decisions. Each choice seemed like a step into unknown territory, full of traps. Sometimes I wondered if I was ready for all of that, if I would have the courage to face a life that, until then, had been made up of only vague promises and distant futures. The fear of other people's judgment was a ghost that haunted me at every corner. I knew that, when my belly started to grow bigger, there would be no way to hide it. I imagined the dirty looks, the cruel whispers, the doors that would close without warning. Deep down, what hurt the most was knowing that I would have to be strong not only for myself, but for that small, silent life that was growing inside me. My mother decided that we would walk to school together. It was the best way to face the truth with our heads held high. That morning, as I was getting ready, my hands were shaking so much that I could barely button my uniform shirt. On the way, the silence between us was heavy, but at the same time, full of complicity. She held my hand tightly, as if she were promising not to let go, no matter what happened. As we walked to school, the words were harsh but fair. They asked about my decision, about my future, about the child that was to come. I answered as best I could, sometimes just with a nod, sometimes with the choked voice of someone who tries to be strong but is still just a scared girl. In the end, it was clear. I could stay there, but I would have to face the consequences. And somehow that gave me strength. I didn't want to run away. Not anymore. As the weeks went by, some familiar faces walked away. Friends who used to share secrets and laughs now walked down the hallway looking at the floor. At first, each loss felt like a silent stab. But little by little, I learned to value those who stayed, those who looked me in the eyes without judging me, those who saw beyond the mistake, beyond the fear, beyond the scars I was beginning to carry. The changes in my body were inevitable and, in a way, they began to give me a strange sense of pride. With each movement I felt, still timid, still uncertain. It was as if a new hope was born inside me. I wasn't just the girl who had made a mistake. I was someone who, despite all the fear, carried a life, a story, an entire future under my skin. My mother went out of her way to take care of me. She worked twice as hard, saving on every little thing so that my baby and I would have what we needed. Sometimes I would find her in the kitchen, sitting alone, staring into space with tired eyes. At those times, my chest would tighten with guilt and gratitude. I wanted to promise her that it would be worth it, that I would be strong, that I would do everything right this time. The first gifts arrived. Small clothes, soft blankets, tiny shoes that looked like toys. Each new item was like a spark of light in the midst of fear. I folded each one carefully, smelled the clean, new fabric, and for a moment I could imagine a different future, where pain would give way to love, where fear would be overcome by the smile of a new life. And so, even in the midst of chaos, a certainty was born within me. I already loved that being I didn't even know yet. It didn't matter what came, how many nights I cried or how many doors closed. I would fight with everything I had because now, more than ever, I knew that inside me there were two hearts beating. And both were yearning for a tomorrow. The months passed with a cruel slowness and at the same time a frightening rush. Every morning when I opened my eyes, it was as if reality hit me full on, reminding me that I no longer had the right to be just an ordinary teenager. I needed to be strong, I needed to be more than I thought I could be. And even trying to convince myself of this, there were days when I simply collapsed, without the strength to fight against everything that was crushing me inside. Doctor's appointments became part of my routine, and with each exam, with each strong beat of that little heart inside me, something changed. I didn't know what the future would be like, but I knew it was coming, faster than I could keep up. Fear was constant, like a shadow that never left me. But there were also moments of such great tenderness that I could barely understand it. My mother, even though she was tired, made sure to hold my hand every step of the way. Sometimes on the way to the hospital, she would tell me stories from her childhood, about how she had also had to learn to be strong too soon. I would listen in silence, feeling a mixture of admiration and sadness, because I finally understood everything she had been through without ever letting me realize it. At school, the stares didn't hurt me as much anymore. I learned to hold my chin up, to face those who judged me and move forward. Some teachers started treating me with a different kind of kindness, with firm but compassionate words. And that somehow gave me the strength to not give up. I knew the road would be long, but I had found within myself a courage that I didn't even know existed before. The nights continued to be my greatest challenge. In the silence of my room, when everything around me was falling asleep, my fears grew and took on frightening forms. I cried softly, so as not to worry my mother even more, hugging the pillow as if holding on to a last shred of hope. I asked God, often in whispers, if one day I would be able to give my son what he deserved. It was during one of these nights that I felt, for the first time, a strong movement inside me. It was like a signal, a silent answer. as if that little life was telling me somehow that it was there resisting alongside me. I cried, but this time not out of fear. I cried out of a love so deep that it went through me, as if life itself was telling me that there was still beauty, even in the midst of chaos. My mother noticed the change in me. I smiled more, even though I still carried fear in my eyes. I began to talk to the baby in a low voice, telling secrets, promising worlds. It was a way to ward off loneliness, to create a bridge between the two of us. Sometimes I would catch myself daydreaming, imagining the face I had yet to recognize, the little hands that would one day hold mine. The new clothes began to fit faster than we expected. My mother, with her practical way, sewed extensions and adjusted everything with silent care. Each stitch of thread was like a promise. She was there, also sewing together what life had torn. I watched her, and silently swore to myself that I would do the same for the child growing inside me. The streets, the people, the world around me seemed distant, unreal. As if I lived in another time, another space, where everything was more intense, more painful, more real. Each day was a silent battle, a step forward carrying the weight of my own mistakes, but also the hope that perhaps one day I would be able to forgive myself. And so I went on, between tears and small smiles, between fears and promises, between dark nights and timid mornings. Every beat of my heart was also a beat of his heart. And even without knowing exactly how, I began to understand that that love, so frightening and so immense, would be the force that would guide me forever. The months passed with a cruel slowness and at the same time a frightening rush. Every morning when I opened my eyes, it was as if reality hit me full on, reminding me that I no longer had the right to be just an ordinary teenager. I needed to be strong, I needed to be more than I thought I could be. And even trying to convince myself of this, there were days when I simply collapsed, without the strength to fight against everything that was crushing me inside. Doctor's appointments became part of my routine, and with each exam, with each strong beat of that little heart inside me, something changed. I didn't know what the future would be like, but I knew it was coming, faster than I could keep up. Fear was constant, like a shadow that never left me, but there were also moments of such great tenderness that I could barely understand it. The last few months arrived like a whirlwind, dragging with them anxiety, fear, and a kind of timid hope that I could barely name. My body no longer belonged to me in the same way. Each step was slower, each movement required an effort that before seemed natural. Looking in the mirror was now inevitable. I saw the transformation stamped on me, marked in each new curve, in each sign of the life that blossomed under my skin. My mother said I was beautiful, but sometimes I couldn't believe it. I felt heavy, vulnerable, as if at any moment I would break into pieces. Still, there was a different glow in her eyes when she looked at me, a silent pride that warmed me even on the days when shame still tried to drag me down. The people around me no longer hid their comments as much. Some were whispered, others said out loud, as if my story were public property. At first, every word pierced my skin like a blade. But over time, I learned to listen only to what mattered. My mother's loving words, the sincere advice from the few friends who remained, the sound of the little heart that beat inside me, strong and stubborn. The nights were still long, but they had changed. They were no longer just filled with fear. Now there were also whispered conversations in the dark, promises made through tears, timid plans for a future that still seemed distant, but that somehow I began to believe I could build. I stroked my belly, feeling life move, and for the first time in a long time I was able to truly smile. At each doctor's appointment, the doctors talked about countdowns, preparations, dates that were approaching too quickly. I left the office with shaky legs, trying to absorb the idea that soon everything would change again, in an even more profound way. Insecurity followed me like a shadow, but there was also a strange courage growing inside me, as if I had learned to be strong, even without wanting to. My mother began to organize everything more quickly. The clothes were washed, folded and put away with an almost ceremonial care. I helped her as much as I could, touching each piece with silent tenderness. With each small gesture, the realization sank deeper. This was no longer a distant dream. It was real, it was palpable. And it was coming, even if my heart didn't feel ready yet. There were afternoons when we would sit together on the sofa in the living room, her hands busy with small embroidery, me just staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. At those times, without needing to say much, we shared a silent sadness and a discreet hope. It was as if we were learning side by side to deal with a life that we never planned, but that somehow was now ours. Sometimes I wondered who that child would be. If he would have my eyes or my mother's smile. If he would one day understand everything I had gone through to have him. I was afraid of not being enough, of not knowing how to love properly, of failing as I had so often felt I had failed. But then I felt a strong movement, a silent response, and all doubts seemed to disappear for a moment. The city outside kept spinning, indifferent to my little world that was changing. People ran, the seasons changed, the calendars turned in a hurry. But inside our house, inside my chest, time seemed suspended, trapped between the fear of what would come and the hope of what could be. Every little detail was saved. Every sensation registered as if I were trying to freeze what was left of my old life before the inevitable leap into the unknown. And that was how, even without realizing it, I was preparing myself. Not with certainties, not with perfect plans, but with a kind of strength that is born in the midst of pain and hope. A strength that does not scream but resists. That doesn't shine but lights up from the inside out. I didn't know what tomorrow would be like, but I knew that when it came, I would no longer be the same. I felt that something inside me was changing every day, as if time itself had accelerated, pulling my life to a place where I still didn't know how to walk. My belly, now large and heavy, was the center of everything. Every step I took seemed measured, every breath a conscious effort to keep going. I was tired, so tired, but there was something stronger than tiredness driving me forward. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night without knowing why. I looked at the dark ceiling, listened to the silence of the house, and felt my heart beating too fast. It was fear, it was expectation, it was the unknown approaching, asking for space inside me. At those times I would run my hands over my belly, looking for a sign, a certainty that would tell me that I wasn't alone. My mother said it was normal, that every woman felt this way near the end. But I felt different, as if I was carrying not only a baby, but also a lifetime of choices, mistakes, dreams, and regrets. The weight was so heavy that sometimes I thought I couldn't bear it. And then, all it took was a slight movement from him to remind me of the reason to keep going. The last few weeks felt like an eternity. The doctor's appointments increased, and with them the questions, the predictions, the attentive looks of the professionals. Each test, each strong beat of that little heart, was a mixture of relief and anguish. I smiled, but inside a silent storm was forming, threatening to overflow at any moment. At home, my mother left everything ready. My bag was packed, my documents separated, my clothes organized in small bags. I watched it all like someone watching the world through the window of a moving train, knowing that something big was approaching, but unable to really understand to what extent it would change everything that I was. I tried to distract myself as best I could. I read books, watched old movies, or just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, imagining what his face would look like. At times, an almost childish fear would take hold of me. What if I didn't know what to do? What if I wasn't strong enough? But then I would remember the strength that had brought me there, and I would cling to it like someone clinging to a plank in the middle of a shipwreck. My dreams also changed. Before, I dreamed of schools, of friendships, of trips. Now I dreamed of little feet running around the house, of light laughter, of sleepless nights lulled by the sound of calm, small breathing. I dreamed of a love so great that it seemed impossible to fit inside me, but somehow it found space. There were afternoons when my mother would sit next to me and tell me stories about when I was a baby. I listened attentively, trying to imagine the girl she described, so full of life and possibilities. I thought about the immense responsibility of raising someone, of guiding another human being through a world that often seemed so cruel. But even so, I felt a spark of hope grow in my chest. The pains began to appear discreetly, like subtle signs that I tried to ignore. With each twinge, with each new discomfort, my heart would race. I knew it was my body preparing itself, warning me that the time was approaching. But there was a part of me that wanted to grab time with its hands, beg for a little more calm, a few more days of silence before everything changed forever. Deep down, I was afraid of losing the girl I had been. I was afraid of never being able to look at myself again without seeing only the trail of the mistakes that had brought me here. But then, on the darkest nights, when I felt that little being move, I remembered that I wasn't made only of fears. I was made of resistance, of love, of dreams that, even though hurt, still insisted on existing. There was a morning when I woke up with the house lit by a different light. It was as if the day itself knew that something was changing. I sat on the edge of the bed and stayed there for long minutes, just feeling the weight of my body, the rhythm of my breathing, the stillness of the moment. Outside, the world seemed so far away that it was hard to believe that it was still spinning. I got up slowly and walked to the window. The sky was clear, a blue so deep that it almost hurt because it was so beautiful. I felt a tear run down my face, not knowing if it was sadness or joy. Maybe it was both. Maybe it was just my body trying to understand what my heart already knew. The end of a journey was approaching, and with it, the beginning of another, much greater one. My mother found me there, standing still, lost in thought. She didn't say anything. She just came closer and put her arm around my shoulders. We stayed like that, hugging each other, looking at the horizon that seemed so vast and uncertain. In the shared silence, we promised each other without words that we would face everything together, no matter what came. From that day on, I began to listen to my body more carefully. Every signal, every new sensation was received as a sacred message. I didn't want the moment to come as a surprise. I wanted to be ready as much as possible. I wanted to be worthy of the life that was growing inside me. I wanted to honor the love that, despite all the setbacks, had brought me there. And it was like that, amidst fears, pains, dreams, and silent promises, that I began to understand that being a mother wasn't about being ready. It was about loving with such great strength that all fear, all doubt, all pain became small compared to what really mattered. And deep down in my chest, even with all the fear that still accompanied me, I knew I would love. The following days were a mix of anxiety and contemplation. Each small movement of his inside me seemed stronger, more urgent, as if my body itself was trying to warn me that the end of the wait was near. Sometimes I would close my eyes and try to record that feeling in my memory, knowing that soon everything would change again, in a way I could not yet imagine. I would find myself observing the little things with a different attention. The smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of my mother's footsteps through the house, the golden light coming through the curtains. Every detail seemed charged with a new meaning, as if my heart was trying to say goodbye to the life I knew before diving into the one that awaited me. Every morning I would wake up startled, my body alert for any sign. Sometimes it was just a restless dream. Other times it was a slight contraction that made me hold my breath. Every night I would get up, walk to the window and stay there, feeling the night breathing around me, trying to calm the turmoil inside me. My mother, always attentive, noticed my restlessness. She didn't say much, she just came closer, gave me a loving look and went back to her tasks. It was as if she understood that there were battles that I needed to fight alone, inside myself in silence. And even without words, her presence was a safe haven where I could rest when the fear became too great. Times I doubted myself. I thought about everything I still didn't know, about everything I hadn't yet experienced. I wondered how someone so full of doubts could teach someone how to live. But then I remembered my mother. I remembered her silent courage, and I clung to the hope that maybe, just like her, I would find my own path. My belly was huge, heavy, and each movement required effort and patience. I felt my clothes tighten. I felt my body asking for rest. But there was also a new energy running through me, a kind of brute strength that was born not from the absence of fear, but from the certainty that, despite it, I would move forward. The afternoons were long and silent. I would sit in the rocking chair by the window and spend hours there, just feeling life move within me. Sometimes I would speak softly to him, promising love, protection, better days. It was a conversation without answers, but it filled the emptiness of the slow days with a meaning I couldn't explain. In the midst of this silent waiting, I began to write him letters. Letters that maybe one day he would read or maybe not. Letters where I poured out all my fears, all my dreams, all the promises that made my heart beat faster. It was as if, by writing, I could build a bridge between who I was and who I needed to be. The light pains began to become more constant. Small waves that came and went, announcing that the moment was approaching. I took deep breaths, tried to stay calm, tried to trust my body, even without knowing exactly how. Each pain was a reminder that the time of waiting was coming to an end, and that soon I would need to be stronger than I had ever been. My mother began to sleep with the bedroom door open, attentive to any call. I knew that she also carried her own fears, even if she tried to hide them. But there was something in her eyes, a silent faith, a trust in me that, as unlikely as it seemed, helped to calm the rough sea inside me. I began to mentally prepare each step. Where the bags were, what documents needed to be taken, what words I wanted to hear at that moment. It was a fragile plan, built on the quicksand of uncertainty. But it was all I had, and I clung to it with the strength of someone who knows that she cannot fail. There was one sunset in particular that remained engraved in my memory. The sky was tinged with warm colors, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth. I sat down in the backyard with difficulty and stayed there, stroking my belly, feeling it move, as if dancing to the sound of the world outside. I cried softly, not out of sadness, but out of deep gratitude for having made it this far. The fear still lived inside me, but now it shared space with something greater. The certainty that, even though I was scared, even though I was full of doubts, I was capable of loving. And this love was stronger than any pain, any judgment, any uncertain future. It was this love that would guide me, that would make me find strength where I believed there was no more. The following nights were a mix of vigilance and hope. I went to sleep late, woke up early, and each new day seemed to push me one step further forward. There was an invisible thread pulling at my life, a silent rope leading me towards something I could no longer avoid or postpone. I just needed to trust, take a deep breath, and move on. And so it was, amid unsent letters, silent tears, and whispered promises, that I said goodbye to the girl I had been. Not with sadness, but with the respect of someone who knows that every step, every mistake, every fear had brought me here. And now, even without knowing everything, even trembling inside, I was ready for whatever was to come. The mornings became moments of silence and reflection. I woke up slowly, feeling every inch of my body, as if I were saying goodbye to it, as if I were preparing myself for something I could no longer put off. I looked at my swollen feet, my heavy hands, and understood that each transformation was my body preparing me for the greatest challenge of my life. My mother spoke little, but her gaze said a lot. Sometimes she would watch me while I drank coffee or tidied up something for no reason. It was a gaze full of questions she didn't dare ask, full of answers she knew I wasn't ready to hear yet. And yet, her silent love sustained me when words failed me. Every step I took through the house was filled with a strange sensation, as if at any moment the world could collapse. Sometimes I would stop in the middle of the hallway, one hand on my belly, and just listen. The sound of my breathing, the echo of my thoughts, the insistent beating of my heart that seemed to accelerate for no reason. It was like living between two worlds, without belonging to either of them. My clothes no longer fit me properly. I improvised, trying to find something comfortable to wear, but deep down I knew that it wasn't just my body that was tight. It was my soul, it was my whole life asking for space to transform. It was the girl I was trying to say goodbye to, the woman who was slowly being born, amid tears, fear, and love. There were days when I wanted to give up. Days when the weight seemed too great, when the future seemed too dark, when the fear of not being enough almost suffocated me. But all it took was for him to move inside me, a silent proof of life, for me to remember why I was still standing, even though I was tired, even though I was scared. Sometimes I wondered what his crying would sound like. What it would be like to see him for the first time, to smell him, to touch his little fingers. I imagined his little face, his closed eyes, his light breathing. And even though I had never seen him, I already loved him with a strength that tore me in half, that rebuilt me with every thought. The afternoons were long, and I filled the time as best I could. I read short passages from books that I could no longer finish. I tidied up the drawers that were already organized. I walked around the house aimlessly. It was hard to contain my anxiety. It was hard to hold back the tears that came without warning, mixed with a longing for something I had not yet known. My mother spoke of hope, of strength, of faith. She said that I was stronger than I imagined, that inside me there was a courage that only mothers knew. I listened to his words and tried to believe them, tried to make them an armor against the fears that insisted on haunting me in the silent early mornings. And the nights were full of secrets. I would lie in bed, put my hands on my belly and feel every little movement like a silent conversation between the two of us. Sometimes I would talk to him quietly, telling him my fears, my hopes, promising to be strong, promising to never abandon him, even when I myself doubted my ability. The clock seemed to mock me, moving too slowly or too quickly, never at the pace I wanted. Sometimes I would close my eyes and ask for time to stop, to give me a little more calm before the storm. Other times I would ask for everything to happen soon, for the wait to end, for me to finally be able to embrace what was waiting for me. My body felt heavier every day, and along with it, a strange acceptance. I no longer fought so much against what was to come. I no longer tried to hide my fear. I accepted it as part of me, like a shadow that walked beside me, reminding me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. In the last week, every dawn felt like an announcement. I woke up with the feeling that everything could change at any moment, as if life were holding its breath, waiting for the right moment to burst into tears, pain, and love. And I waited too, in silence, with my heart in my hands, ready for whatever was to come. There was an afternoon when the sky was cloudy, and the wind brought a smell of rain so strong that it seemed to wash the soul. I sat on the porch, hugged my belly and closed my eyes. I asked God for strength, I asked for wisdom, I asked that, when the time came, I would not be alone, even if no one was by my side. I asked that, somehow, I could be everything that little being deserved. With each light contraction that appeared, I knew I was closer. It was as if my body was drawing the path that I would have to take, slow and painful, but necessary. And no matter how afraid I was, there was a flame lit inside me, small, shy, but alive, lighting the way in the middle of the darkness. That night when I went to bed, I hugged the pillow to my chest and cried silently. It was no longer fear, no longer pain. It was gratitude. Gratitude for having made it this far, for still being on my feet, for still believing, even with my heart so broken, that love is always greater. That, in the end, it was this love that would save me. The next day dawned strange. There was something in the air, an invisible tension that made my skin crawl. I got up slowly, my body feeling heavier than ever, and tried to keep up with my routine as if everything was normal. But deep down I knew it wasn't. The silence in the house seemed denser, as if the whole world was holding its breath along with me. I walked to the kitchen and tried to make coffee, but my hands were shaking. I left the kettle on the stove and sat at the table, staring into space. It was as if time had changed its rhythm, as if each second carried an impossible weight. I placed my hands on my stomach and felt it move calmly, as if telling me to be brave. My mother noticed my state immediately. She didn't ask anything. She just came closer, put a hand on my shoulder and stayed there, lending me her silent strength. I wanted to cry. I wanted to collapse in that lap that had so often been my shelter, but I held it in. I knew I needed to be strong, even though the desire to disappear was greater. I spent the day trying to occupy my mind, organizing things that were already organized, folding clothes that were already folded. Every little discomfort in my body was a warning. I tried to pretend I didn't notice. I tried to postpone the inevitable, as if that would give me more time to breathe, to accept what was about to happen. In the afternoon, the sky suddenly darkened. The wind was strong, and the trees made noises as if they were whispering secrets that only nature could understand. I sat on the porch again, hugging my own body, feeling the wind blow on my face. I closed my eyes and silently prayed that I would have enough strength to face whatever came. When the first strong pain started, I still tried to deny it. I took a deep breath, walked around the house, drank water, lay down, and then got up again. But my body knew. Each contraction was a wave that dragged me closer to a new beginning, and there was no way to escape. Life had already decided, and now all I could do was accept it. My mother stayed close, watching, respecting my silence. She packed a simple bag, as if she knew exactly what to do without having to say anything. I watched her movements with gratitude and fear. It was comforting to have someone by my side, but it was also painful to admit that the choice, the struggle, and the fear were mine alone. The hours passed, and the pain grew stronger. It wasn't just my body that hurt. It was my soul that seemed to be tearing itself apart. Each contraction made me dive into myself, into a dark and deep place where only I and that life that wanted to be born existed. It was a silent and intimate battle that no one could fight for me. There was a moment when I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask for everything to stop. I wanted to go back in time and just be a carefree girl again. But then, in the midst of the pain, I felt him move, strong, determined. It was as if he was telling me that he was also fighting, that he also needed me. And that gave me a strength I didn't know existed. My mother helped me get ready without rushing, with the calm of someone who knows that, despite the urgency, fear needs affection so as not to destroy us. Each gesture of hers was a silent reminder that, even in pain, even in fear, love is what guides us, what sustains us when everything seems to fall apart. As we got ready to leave, I looked around and felt a pang in my chest. It was as if I was saying goodbye to my home, to my childhood, to the life I knew. I picked up the letters I had written to him one last time, pressed them to my chest, and promised myself that, no matter what happened, I would not give up on us. The car seemed too small, the city seemed too far away. Each pothole in the road was one more pain, one more fear, a vivid reminder that the moment had arrived. I looked out the window, watching the lights pass quickly, trying to engrave in my memory that feeling of being between two worlds, without yet belonging to either of them. Arriving at the hospital, the strong smell, the cold lights, the white corridors hit me like an icy wave. Everything was scary, everything seemed too big for me. But there was also a determination in my steps, an instinct that guided me even when my mind wanted to give up. It was as if love took over me and pushed me forward. The nurses spoke in a calm tone, but their eyes darted quickly. Their steps were urgent. I tried to breathe as they had taught me, tried to focus on something that would keep me steady. But with each pain, with each contraction, it was as if the whole world disappeared and all that was left was me, my body, and the life that insisted on being born. Before being taken away, my mother held my hand tightly. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears, And there, without words, she gave me the courage I needed. I took a deep breath, squeezed her hand with all my strength, and for the first time, let my courage speak louder than my fear. I was ready. I needed to be. The stretcher felt cold under my body. Every movement they made to position me felt like they were tearing away a piece of my courage. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to escape that bright light on the ceiling, but reality pulled me back, reminding me that there was no way to run, no way to pretend it was just a nightmare. The contractions came like furious waves, leaving me breathless, making the ground disappear beneath my feet. I clutched the sheets, searching for some anchor in the midst of the storm that was building inside me. Every breath was a battle, every sigh, a silent plea for all of this to make sense in the end. The nurses spoke words that I couldn't quite understand. Their faces came and went like shadows in the middle of my blurred vision. I tried to hold on to their voices, but the sound seemed distant, as if I were submerged in a rough sea, struggling to keep my head above water. My body was shaking. It wasn't just from the physical pain, but from the brutal mix of fear, love, and surrender. I was being pushed to a limit I never imagined existed, and there was no one who could cross that line for me. It was my fight, my choice, my story being written with great difficulty. Deep down, a primitive force was driving me. It was bigger than me, bigger than any fear. It was the certainty that now I wasn't fighting just for myself. Every tear, every pain, every broken sigh was also for him, for that small being who trusted me before he even understood the world. Times I thought I couldn't take it anymore. The pain was so strong that it seemed to tear me apart. I wondered how I was still breathing, how I was still keeping my eyes open. But then I felt its weight inside me, its desperate movement, and I found strength where there was none. The nurse's hands guided me, trying to teach me how to breathe, how to endure. But inside me there was a stronger voice, a voice that screamed that I had to keep going. It was a silent dialogue between what I had been and what I was becoming, between the fear of failing and the hope of winning. Time lost all meaning. I didn't know if minutes or hours had passed. All that existed was that eternal moment, that suspended space between the scared girl I was and the mother I was about to become. Every scream that tried to escape my throat was muffled by the determination not to give up. I felt my body give in, accept the pain, make way for the new. It was a surrender and, at the same time, a victory. It was no longer me against the world, it was me in communion with life, with nature, with something infinitely greater than my own fears. My mother appeared in the corner of the room. I couldn't get close, but our eyes met. In her gaze there was pride, there was love, there was the same pain that ran through me, but there was also the unshakable faith that I could do it. I held on to that image like an anchor, like a lighthouse in the dark night. Sweat ran down my face, mixing with silent tears. I could no longer distinguish what was pain, what was tiredness, what was love. It was all one thing, a whirlwind that consumed me and, at the same time, built me in a way that I could never explain. The instructions came quickly, interrupted by encouragements that seemed like distant voices. I wanted to respond, I wanted to show that I was listening, but everything in me was focused on continuing, on fighting, on not giving up. It was like going through a storm with my eyes closed, guided only by faith. There was a moment when everything seemed to stop. The sound, the pain, even time. A heavy silence took over the room, as if the world had held its breath with me. I knew I was very close. I knew I was on the edge of an abyss from which I could not return. My heart was beating so hard it seemed to echo off the walls. I closed my eyes, clasped my hands tightly and prepared myself. I didn't know what it would be like, I didn't know if I would have the strength, but I knew I had to trust. For the first time I truly accepted that it was no longer about me. It was about the two of us. About the love that guided me even in the darkness. Then I took a deep breath. Once, twice, 3 times. And I surrendered. With everything I was, with everything I felt, with all my fear, all my courage, all my hope. I surrendered to the love that transformed me from the inside out, even though I still didn't know exactly who I would be after that night. The lights in the room seemed even brighter, as if they wanted to keep me awake, to force me to face everything head-on. There was nowhere to run. Every part of my body screamed, but my mind no longer thought about giving up. I was pure instinct, pure resistance. It was as if the pain was molding me, as if it were forging me into something new. The nurses told me to stay calm, to focus, to breathe properly. I tried to obey, but sometimes it was difficult. The contractions were so strong, so overwhelming, that it was as if they were dragging me to another world. I pressed my hands against the sheets, closed my eyes and let my body speak for me. Between one wave of pain and the next, I felt a brief relief, a small respite. And in those brief moments I thought about him. I thought about what his face would be like, his smell, his first cry. I wondered if he would feel safe with me, if he would understand that, even though I was scared, I already loved him more than I loved myself. The room seemed to shrink with each passing minute. The white walls, the sound of hurried footsteps, the whispers between the doctors. Everything was like distant music, a backdrop to the battle that was going on inside me. I wanted to scream for everything to stop. I wanted to ask the world to wait until I felt ready. But there was no more time. I looked at the ceiling and tried to remember everything I had experienced up until that point. The sleepless nights, the hidden fears, the postponed dreams. Every tear, every silent prayer, every small gesture of courage. Everything had brought me to that moment. Everything had prepared me for that leap into the dark. I felt an even stronger pressure, an urgency that gave me no choice. The doctors took their positions. The instructions became firmer. It was time to fight with everything I had. I took a deep breath, squeezed my eyes shut, and gave in. My body seemed to know what to do, even though my mind was in pieces. Sweat ran down my temples, wetting my neck. The tears came uncontrollably, mixed with the effort, the pain, the hope. I no longer knew who I was, I just knew that I had to keep going, I had to get to the end. It was a road of no return, and each step hurt as if I were leaving pieces of myself behind. With each command, each impulse, I felt I was getting closer. The pain was unbearable, but there was also a promise hidden in it, as if life was telling me that, on the other side of the pain, there was something worthwhile. And I clung to that promise with everything I had left. The memory of my mother back there, holding my hand before they left me alone in the room, came like a flame in the middle of the darkness. It was for her too that I fought. For everything she had been for me, for everything I wanted to be for him. It was her strength that now pulsed in my blood. The pains came one after the other, without giving me room to breathe. I didn't know how I was still conscious. I didn't know how my body resisted. But then, in the midst of the pain, I felt something different. A strange relief, a feeling that something was about to happen. And my heart beat even faster. The doctors told me to stay calm, that I was almost there. I heard their voices as if they were coming from far away. My hands were shaking, my legs felt like they were made of wind. But inside me there was a stronger voice, a voice that pushed me, that made me keep going even when everything inside me wanted to stop. I thought about him again. About the little being I had carried for so many months. About the love that grew with him, silent, strong, unbreakable. I thought about everything I wanted to say to him as soon as his eyes met mine. And that gave me the last spark of strength I needed. I closed my eyes tightly and surrendered myself to what was to come. There was no more room for fear or doubts. There was only love, pulsing inside me with a force so great that it seemed capable of tearing apart the universe itself. It was for him. It was for me. It was for the new story that was beginning there, even before it was written. The whole world seemed to stop. For an instant there was no more pain, no more hospital, no more lights, no more sounds. There was only that silent emptiness, full of promises and possibilities. I knew that, in a few moments, my life would change forever. And even without knowing how it would be, for the first time I accepted it. I took a deep breath, clenched my fists and prepared myself for the last step. I was no longer the scared girl I had been before. I was someone else. Someone who had gone through fear, pain, doubt, and still remained standing, ready to receive what life had in store for me. The silence of the room was broken by a firm command. It was now. I knew there was no more time for doubts or hesitation. I had to trust my body, trust that strength that was born from my insides. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath and surrendered myself again, like someone jumping off a cliff without looking down. The pain returned with even more violence, tearing through my body and soul. I screamed inside, but on the outside there was only the hoarse sound of my breathing, heavy, uneven, determined. I wanted so badly for it to end soon. I wanted so badly to embrace that little piece of me that I didn't even know very well yet, but already loved with everything I had. Every piece of advice I heard seemed like an impossible challenge. Push. Breathe. Again. Hold on. My body seemed to no longer obey me, but my soul, it didn't give up. Every time I thought I couldn't do it, the image of him gave me strength. The idea of having him in my arms was the only thing that kept me going. The lights flashed in my mind. It was as if I were between two worlds, suspended in a space where pain and hope mixed in a cruel and beautiful way at the same time. I wanted to scream that I was tired, that I couldn't take it anymore. But deep down I knew I could. I knew I had to. Sweat ran down my face, wetting my hair, which was stuck to my forehead. I was shaking. I couldn't tell if it was from pain or emotion. The sounds around me were mixing together in a meaningless whirlwind, but there was a voice, a single voice inside me, repeating over and over, "It's for him, it's for you." In a moment of lucidity, I opened my eyes and saw the reflection of tears in the eyes of the nurse next to me. They weren't just technicians there. They were witnesses to the most brutal and beautiful transformation a person can experience. They saw my struggle and, in some silent way, fought with me. The contractions came so fast that there was barely time to breathe between one and the next. Each push was like climbing a steep mountain, knowing that the view from the top would be the greatest prize in life. I wanted to see that face, I wanted to hear that cry. I wanted to feel that little heart beating outside of me. My mother, on the other side of the glass, cried silently. I saw her eyes shining, her hands joined in prayer. That gave me more strength than any words. I wasn't alone. I never had been. Even when fear consumed me, there was love all around me, sustaining every step I took. The whole world seemed to have concentrated in that moment. As if all the pain, all the waiting, all the dreams that had fallen asleep inside me were about to awaken. It was an overwhelming and liberating feeling at the same time. As if I were being reborn along with him. I knew I was very close. The doctor's gaze became more attentive, more firm. The words became encouragement, almost pleas. Breathe deeply. One more time. And I obeyed, even when my body asked me to give up, even when my head said it was too much for me. I felt his presence, so close, so real, so much a part of me. It was as if our hearts were connected by an invisible thread, pulling each other through that pain. And I knew, with a certainty that came from somewhere deep, that we were ready, that somehow we were already one life. Time seemed to stretch, to drag on in slow motion. Each second was an entire universe of effort and hope. I closed my eyes and thought about the two of us, about the story we were beginning to build, about the life that was about to change forever. And even though I was afraid, there was peace in me. I felt a final wave of pain, so intense that for a moment I thought I would fade away. But I didn't. Kept going. And it was at that moment that I realized. Pain wasn't the end, it was the beginning. It was through pain that life opened up, that light broke through the darkness, that love became something that could be touched. I took a deep breath, with everything I had left. I knew it was the last effort before the most anticipated meeting of my life. And even though I was exhausted, even though I was broken into 1,000 pieces, I found a thread of strength within me. Because there, in that cold, bright room, a new story was about to begin. I closed my eyes once more and, with all the love in the world pulsing inside me, I prepared myself to receive him in my arms. It was not yet time to cry, it was not yet time to meet him, but it was the moment when, deep down, I already knew I would never be the same again. The room seemed to spin slowly around me. Everything was so intense that sometimes I could barely distinguish what was reality and what was just my mind trying to hold on to some security. Each breath was a battle won. Each contraction a small death and rebirth within me. The voices around me blended into a distant whisper. I heard someone say that I was doing well, that I was very close. But deep down I already knew. My body screamed it. My heart beat this certainty at a frantic, almost out of rhythm. It was an overwhelming and, at the same time, deeply sacred feeling. Time seemed to have no logic anymore. Sometimes it went by too fast. Sometimes it dragged on like an eternity. I tried to focus on each second, each order, each bit of strength I still had left. I tried to visualize his face again, like an anchor, like a lighthouse in the middle of the storm. The pain came in waves, stronger and stronger, closer and closer together. My body trembled with exhaustion, my hands were cold, but I knew I had to keep going. Even without understanding how, my body knew the way, and I just followed it, guided by an instinct that seemed bigger than me. I looked at the ceiling and let the tears flow. It wasn't just pain. It was fear. It was love. It was the longing for a part of me that I didn't even know yet. It was the awareness that, at the end of all that, a new life would be born, and with it a new version of myself. I felt the pressure increase even more, almost unbearable. I heard the doctor asking me to focus, to listen to her voice, to trust. And that's what I did. Even exhausted, even bleeding courage from every pore, I found within myself a last shred of fight. Because now it wasn't just for me anymore. I thought about all the times when I thought I wouldn't be able to do it, all the nights I cried in the dark, asking God if I could get through all that. And now, there, at the height of my pain, at the limit of my strength, I knew I was doing it. I was already stronger than I ever imagined. A strange sensation took hold of me, as if time had stopped completely. Everything went silent, everything went still, and I felt a different, profound peace. It was as if, at that moment, the universe was giving me a small, silent hug, recognizing the fight I was fighting. I felt safe hands helping me, instructing me, guiding my every move with care and firmness. It was as if I was being carried by an invisible current, as if the world, for a brief moment, was rooting for me. And inside me, it was also fighting, wanting to find its way to my embrace. Sweat was running down my face, and my body felt like it was made of fire and ice at the same time. Everything hurt, everything was shaking, but there was also a new energy emerging, a raw and beautiful strength that grew with each passing second. I was on the edge, but somehow I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. The doctor told me I was almost there. And that little phrase, so simple, was like an explosion inside me. Almost there. It was all I needed to hear. I closed my eyes tightly, took the deepest breath I could, and prepared myself for what would be the greatest effort of my life. Inside me, a silent prayer was forming. It wasn't a prayer of words, but of feelings. It was gratitude for having made it this far. It was fear of the unknown. It was pure, raw, torn love. A love that I didn't know I could feel. But that was now the only thing that sustained me. Everything around me disappeared. There was no more room, no more pain, no more voices. There was only me and him. There was only the promise that, in a few moments, our eyes would meet for the first time. And all the struggle, all the waiting, all the pain would make sense. And it was at that moment, with my heart in pieces and at the same time more whole than ever, that I realized. Life is made up of those moments when everything seems impossible, but we still choose to move forward. And I kept going, for him, for myself, for the story that was being born with each beat of my heart. There, amidst tears, pain, and hope, I understood that, even before seeing him, I was already a mother. The scream that escaped my throat was more than pain. It was also liberation. The final force tore my body and soul in two. But I felt with an unshakable certainty, that I was giving everything of myself to bring him into the world. The light in the room seemed to shine brighter, blinding me for a second, and then I heard a sound, a fragile cry, a lament that was music and revolution at the same time. Tears overflowed my eyes before I could control it. I couldn't see anything yet, but I knew he had arrived. An unprecedented warmth ran through my chest, crushing the pain and exhaustion. Everything I had been up until that moment seemed small compared to what was now being born inside me. Someone said my name and I barely heard it. My head was spinning, my hands were shaking, and yet, in the midst of all that internal chaos, I desperately sought to see him, to touch him, to prove to myself that he was real. I wanted to hear him again, to smell him, to embrace that small being with everything that I was. And then, in a gesture that seemed to have been torn from time itself, they placed him in my arms. My skin met his, warm and moist, and it was as if the entire world fell silent to watch us. He was so small, so absolutely perfect, that my heart ached in a new, beautiful and frightening way. I ran my fingers, trembling, over his cheek. His skin was soft as silk, and his mouth moved in small, clumsy spasms. He opened his eyes for a moment, eyes that seemed to see much more than they should, and in that fragile, eternal gaze, I found everything I never knew I was looking for. My chest heaved, still fighting against the pain, still trying to keep up with the absurd speed of everything that was happening. But nothing else mattered. There, in that moment, it was just the two of us. Mother and son. Two hearts that had danced together in silence for so long and now, finally, could meet. His scent filled my senses, and it was like home. A peace. Like a promise. I cried softly, a new cry, no longer from fear or exhaustion, but from a love that overflowed from the inside out, that filled all the cracks that life had opened in me. The hands that had previously guided me now slowly moved away, respecting the silent miracle that was unfolding there. I heard voices murmuring, machines being turned off, footsteps hurried from one side to the other. But none of that could tear me away from that sacred moment. The doctor smiled, a tired and genuine smile, and said that he was fine, that I was fine too. Simple words, but they seemed to crown the greatest battle of my existence. I nodded, unable to speak, and turned my attention to that small being who was now the center of my universe. He stirred in my arms, making a hoarse and charming sound. My instinct was to protect him, to cuddle him against my chest, to whisper words that not even I knew what they would be. It didn't matter. He understood. I felt that somehow he understood everything. The tears continued to fall, washing my face, washing my soul. Each drop washed away the old fears, the doubts that so often consumed me during endless nights. I was someone else now. Reborn. Rebuilt. Whole in a way I never imagined possible. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the tiredness, the pain, and the happiness mix. Inside me there was a calm that nothing could break. Life could be unpredictable, hard and scary, but there with him in my arms, I knew I could face whatever came. I opened my eyes again and met his gaze, still cloudy, still small, but filled with something greater than words could explain. It was a silent pact, an eternal promise. He was mine. I was his. Forever. And so, between sighs and silent promises, I understood that true strength was not in winning without fear, but in moving forward despite it. And in that silent embrace, between fragility and immensity, the truest love I had ever known was born. Little by little, they began to cleanse my body, to sew up the invisible and visible wounds that moment had opened. I barely felt any pain anymore. Everything in me was numb to the overwhelming love that took over my being. He weighed so little in my arms, and at the same time, he was the most sacred weight I had ever carried. I watched his little fingers closing and opening, as if he were testing for the first time the world that awaited him. Every detail was a miracle. His tiny nails, the soft contour of his eyebrows, the delicate curve of his little ears. I wanted to engrave everything in my memory, so I would never forget that first moment when he was completely mine. They told me they needed to take him away for a moment for his first care. My heart panicked. I held him close to my chest, wanting to protect him from the whole world, wanting to tell him that he didn't need to go anywhere without me. But the words wouldn't come out, and my resistance melted away in the face of the trust one saw in the eyes of the person who promised to take care of him. I watched, helpless, as they took him a few steps away. My eyes never left his little body, and the distance, although small, felt like an abyss tearing through my chest. It was a physical and emotional void that opened violently inside me, and I was only able to breathe again when I heard his little cry echoing through the room. As he received his first care, my hands reached for the bedsheet, clutching it tightly, as if that would keep me anchored in that new and overwhelming reality. I wanted to run to him, hug him again, promise him out loud that nothing and no one would tear him away from me. I felt a hot tear run down the side of my face and get lost in the pillow. It was as if the tide inside me had changed forever. Before I was made of fears, doubts, uncertainties. Now I was made of him. Every beat of my heart, every difficult breath, every thought, revolved around that little being. When they finally brought him back to me, already wrapped up and clean, my chest opened in a silent sob. I stretched out my trembling arms, desperate to feel him next to me again. And when they placed him on my lap, everything inside me found its place. I was his home, and he mine. The nurse carefully adjusted his blankets and whispered to me to make him skin to skin. I took off my shirt with the little strength I had and brought him close to my bare skin. The warmth of his body invaded mine, and in that moment, there was no pain, no tiredness, no fear. Only love. A raw, primitive, unconditional love. He snuggled into me with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he belonged. His little hands touched my chest lightly, and I swear that in that touch there was the entire history of the universe. A silent exchange of promises, a connection that no force would be able to break. With my eyes closed, I whispered his name for the first time. I said it softly, as if it were a secret between the two of us, as if saying it out loud could make that moment even more real. My chest ached with tenderness as I heard it echo there, between us like a blessing. As the minutes passed, the adrenaline gave way to a deep, almost uncontrollable exhaustion. But I refused to sleep. I needed to enjoy every second of that beginning. I needed to smell him, memorize every curve of his face, keep within me every moment of that love that had just been born. He slept peacefully on my chest, and I wondered how it was possible for so much beauty to exist in the world. How it was possible for such intense pain to have transformed into something so sublime. I understood then that this is what true love is. Going through the storm and finding, in the midst of destruction, a secret garden that is just ours. Time outside could run, the worries of the world could wait. Nothing else was urgent now. Only the two of us existed. Only the warmth of our skin, the sound of our intertwined breathing, the silent certainty that I would do anything to protect him. And as I stroked his fine hair, I silently promised to be a shelter on stormy days, to be his lap on tired days, to be strength when fear came. I was his. And, for the first time in a long time, I was also truly mine. There, in that silent dawn, amidst tears and invisible promises, I knew. The truest love is the one born of courage. And never again in my entire life would I stop being brave. The sun was beginning to rise outside, painting the sky with soft colors that I could barely make out through the fogged-up window. Everything inside me seemed suspended, as if time had slowed down to give us this first morning together. The warmth of his little body still pressed against my chest was the only anchor I needed. I looked at him with the golden light kissing his sleeping face, and for the first time, I felt the real weight of the responsibility I had just embraced. I was now his universe. Every decision, every gesture, every choice I made would have the power to shape the path he would follow. And that scared me more than any pain I had ever felt. At the same time, along with the fear, there was an overwhelming tenderness, an almost desperate desire to do the right thing, to be what he needed. I wanted to be the calm on stormy days, the steady hand when he doubted his steps, the right hug when the world seemed too big. My thoughts were interrupted by his slight movement, moving in search of something he still couldn't name, but that I understood instinctively. The hunger for life. The need for connection, for survival. The nurse approached with a tired smile and instructed me on how to breastfeed him for the first time. I tried to position him as I had been taught, but my trembling hands and the fear of hurting him paralyzed me for a few seconds. I took a deep breath, as if I were preparing myself to go through yet another crossing. And then, with patience and gentleness, he found his way. And he began. I felt a sharp pain at first, a strange sensation that tore at my flesh and my soul at the same time. But the pain quickly mixed with an emotion so overwhelming that it made me close my eyes. It was life flowing from me to him. It was the first real, visceral exchange between the two of us. The tears came back without me being able to stop them. Each suck of his seemed to pull not only the milk, but also my fears, my old loneliness, my old version. Little by little, I felt something inside me rebuild itself, grow stronger. As if, with each moment that he fed, I was also reborn. I stood there, motionless, observing every detail. The way his little eyes closed slightly, how his small hand rested on my chest, how his sighs seemed like notes of a silent song that only the two of us could hear. It was more than physical. It was spiritual. The room around us seemed to float in an unrecognizable peace. The voices that had been hurried before now spoke in soft, almost reverent tones. As if everyone there understood that we were witnessing the beginning of a story that could never be told in words. When he finished, he rested against my chest again, satisfied, safe, surrendered. I looked at him as if I were looking at a piece of my own heart outside my body, beating independently, but still deeply connected to me. I wanted to never let go. The nurse asked if I wanted to rest, but the word rest seemed absurd. How could I rest from something that was bigger than anything? How could I close my eyes to the miracle that had just happened before them? So I just nodded silently, without taking my eyes off him. The hours dragged by in a sweet way, as if the universe knew that I needed more time to understand the immensity of what I was experiencing. I stayed there, awake, loving him with the intensity of someone who understands that some moments in life will never come back. I thought about all the times I doubted myself, all the nights I cried alone, thinking I wouldn't be able to do it. And now, with him in my arms, I realized I had always been able to do it. I had always been strong. I just needed a reason to discover it. And now, my reason was breathing softly against my skin. I felt sleep weigh down on me like a calm tide. I knew that soon I would have to give in, close my eyes and trust that the world would keep turning even if I rested for a moment. But first I still wanted one more moment. One last breath of this magical dawn that was just ours. I kissed his forehead slowly, as if I could seal all the promises I would still make. And before I let myself fall asleep, I whispered to him the greatest truth my heart could offer. You are the most beautiful love I have ever felt. The sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway woke me up. I was still there, with him nestled in my arms, like an extension of my own body. My eyes took a while to open, and when they did, I found the soft morning light invading the room, as if the whole world had woken up differently. I felt a new emotion rise in my chest when the nurse came in with a gentle smile and announced that my family was outside, waiting to see us. Suddenly, my heart started racing. It was as if, for the first time, I was going to present to the world the love that until then had been mine alone. I carefully arranged him on my lap, trying to find the strength to appear firm, when inside I was nothing but trembling. Every little movement of his reminded me of the fragility of life, of the preciousness of that moment. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be worthy of the miracle I carried in my arms. I heard the door open slowly and saw familiar faces, teary eyes, trembling smiles. They entered in silence, as if they respected without knowing the sacredness of what they were about to witness. And there, in that meeting of glances, my heart almost didn't fit inside me. My mother was the first to approach. Her eyes shone in a way I had never seen before. When she hesitantly reached out to touch his little head, I saw in her gesture the entire history that connected us. Mother, daughter, grandson. 3 generations united in that small room. She whispered words that I could barely hear, but I didn't need to. I understood everything by the way her hands trembled, by the way her eyes filled with love and longing at the same time. In that moment, I saw in her the girl who had once also needed to be strong for me. Other steps followed, and each hug, each look, seemed to push me even further into the reality I now inhabited. I was a mother. I was a bridge between what had passed and what was yet to come. And all of this pierced me with a force that hurt and healed at the same time. When my father approached, his eyes, hardened by life, melted. He held my hand so tightly that it seemed he was trying to convey without words everything he had never been able to say. I saw in his silence an awkward but pure love. A love that now extended to my son like an invisible chain. My brothers, shy, approached later. Smiles contained tears, muffled jokes. I saw on their faces the astonishment at the fragility of such a small life. I also saw the silent respect that arises in the face of something so immense that words become too small. Each of them left a mark on that moment, like small stamps of love and promise. Each one, in their own way, said that he would never be alone, that the world around him would be full of outstretched arms and open hearts. I, silent, observed everything as if watching a dream unfold before my eyes. Each detail was so precious, so unique, that I wished I could freeze time, save each second inside an invisible box to revisit when life got difficult. He, so small, slept peacefully amidst that whirlwind of emotions, as if he knew, in some mysterious way, that he was surrounded by love, as if he knew that, even without understanding what the world was, he already had a safe place to grow. When the room finally emptied, and it was just the two of us again, I felt the sweet weight of solitude filled. It was no longer a solitude of emptiness. It was a solitude of completeness, of enough love to fill all the corners that had previously been made of fear. I gently ran my fingers over his forehead, silently promising that I would do everything in my power to be better every day. Because now it was no longer just about me. It was about us, about what we would build together step by step, tear by tear, smile by smile. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the emotion overflow me. Because in that small hospital room, between silent kisses and hidden tears, I understood that true love is always greater than words can tell. And I was just beginning to live the most beautiful story of my life. The afternoon fell slowly, dyeing the sky a golden hue that seemed almost like a silent blessing. The visitors had gone, the commotion had subsided, and now it was just the two of us again. It was strange to think that, at such a young age, he had already become the center of my world. The nurse came in quietly, bringing a small basin of warm water and some towels. It was time for his first bath. I felt the fear return, small and insistent, whispering that I wouldn't be able to do it. But there was something bigger inside me now. Something that told me that, even though I was shaking, I could do it. I approached him, holding him with both hands, so slowly, so carefully, as if each movement could break him. He opened his eyes for the first time that day, and I saw something there that took my breath away. Trust. Pure, complete, without questions. He trusted me. As I wet his little body, each drop of water seemed to wash away not only his skin, but also the marks of who I had been up until now. It was as if I was also shedding my fear, my insecurity, the girl who once doubted that she would be able to love like that. He cried, a small, fragile cry that cut through my chest like glass. But as I wrapped him in the warm towel and brought him back into my arms, I saw that he quickly calmed down. There, where my heart beat close to his, was where he found peace. And so did I. I laid him down on the bed, changed his clothes with gestures that were still clumsy, still insecure, but filled with such immense love that no lack of practice would be able to diminish. With each touch, with each whispered word, I became less afraid and more courageous. When I finished, I sat next to him just watching. The afternoon light came in through the window and danced over her fine hair, her flushed cheeks, her tiny hands. It was hard to believe that so much life could fit into something so small. In that illuminated solitude, I let my heart speak. I spoke softly to it about everything I dreamed of, everything I feared, everything I hoped for. I promised to be a shelter, a road, and courage when it was lacking. I promised to love, even on difficult days, even on silent days, even when he doubted himself. Time passed slowly, cradling our sighs, our first steps on this new path. And I understood, with the clarity of someone waking up from a long dream, that motherhood was not only made up of great and memorable moments. It was made up of these small moments of silent surrender. When night fell, preparing the world for a new cycle, a new stage, I felt that something inside me was also ending and beginning at the same time. It was the end of the woman I had been up until now. It was the birth of the woman who would now carry love in place of the old doubts. Lying next to him, listening to his calm breathing, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. It was not a peace of absence of fear, but of acceptance. The acceptance that love is made of imperfections, of attempts, of mistakes, and of new beginnings. I closed my eyes and, for a moment, I traveled to the future. I imagined his first words, his first steps, his first falls. I imagined the sleepless nights, the silly fights, the tight hugs, the unexpected "I love yous." I smiled in the dark, understanding that life would be difficult, yes, but it would also be beautiful in a way that nothing else could be. The dawn enveloped us like a silent cloak. And, in that sacred stillness, I understood that I didn't need to know everything. I didn't need to have all the answers. Everything I needed was there. In the warmth of him next to me, in the sound of his breathing, in the gentle weight of his presence. I kissed his forehead one last time before falling asleep, and silently I gave thanks. I gave thanks for the life that was being renewed through us. I was grateful for the strength I didn't even know I had. I was grateful, above all, for finally understanding that being a mother is not about being perfect. It's about never giving up on loving. And so, on that calm night, in the silent embrace between me and my son, life was rewritten. And I knew, with all the certainty I could muster, we were ready for everything that was to come. I stayed there with him nestled against my chest, feeling his warmth and his unique scent, so new and so essential. Each sigh he took seemed to align my world, stitching together all my broken pieces. I stroked his head with trembling fingers, as if touching a miracle. The nurse came in again, but now her steps were soft, almost respecting the sacred silence that existed between us. She simply smiled and asked softly if I wanted them to take him to the nursery. I shook my head, unable to let go of him, unable to imagine any distance between us. He was so small, so light, and at the same time, he seemed to carry an immense weight inside me. The weight of responsibility, of love, of the future that was now intertwined with mine. I felt a warm tear run down my cheek and, for the first time in a long time, I didn't try to hold it back. The lights in the room were low, and the world outside seemed to have slowed down to keep up with us. There were only the two of us in that space, suspended between pain and redemption, between the end of a wait and the beginning of everything that was to come. I spent hours just watching him sleep. Every movement, every expression, every sigh were like silent promises of a story that we would still write together. I wanted to record everything, every detail, as if I could freeze time. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to keep that feeling forever. His warmth on me, his soft weight, the sound of his breathing mixing with the rapid beating of my heart. My whole life made sense in that moment. I remembered the sleepless nights during pregnancy, the pain, the fears, the dreams whispered through tears in the dark. Every anguish now seemed so small compared to the grandeur of this moment. Everything had prepared me for it. I felt an immense desire to talk, even knowing that he wouldn't understand. So I began to whisper promises. I promised to be by his side through every step, through every fall. I promised that, even imperfect, my love would always be whole, always his. His peaceful little face, still asleep, seemed to hear me. He moved a little, and that simple gesture brought a new wave of emotion from me. He was so fragile, so dependent, and, at the same time, so powerful in his existence. Time inside that room seemed suspended, as if the universe had stopped just to give us space for this first, unhurried encounter. And I knew, with a certainty that came from a deep and ancient place, that I would never forget that night. Dawn was approaching, bringing with it a gentle breeze that came in through the crack in the window. I cradled him in my arms and pulled the blanket over us both, as if I wanted to protect the most sacred thing in the world. There was no more pain, no more fear. There was a love so absolute that it seemed almost impossible to bear. But I endured it. I fed on it. It was this love that now ran through my veins, giving new meaning to everything I was. Sleep came slowly, like a silent blessing. Before falling asleep, I kissed his forehead and rested my face against his, feeling our breath mingle. I whispered once more, almost in a breath, "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for existing." And there, between sleep and wakefulness, between the past I was leaving behind and the future that was opening up before us, I understood. I had not only given birth to a life, I had also been reborn. In that silent dawn, mother and child were born together. With him in my arms, I closed my eyes, surrendering myself to this new beginning, and fell asleep with my soul whole. The morning began to break while I still had him in my arms. The golden light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the window, painting the room with a softness that seemed made for us. Each ray of sunlight that touched his skin reminded me that life, despite all the pain, is a rare gift. My body still ached, heavy and exhausted, but his presence on me was the medicine I didn't even know I needed. Each beat of his little heart seemed to breathe new life into mine. I felt complete in a way that human words could never describe. I looked at him and imagined the future that awaited him. How many times he would fall and get up. How many times he would cry without knowing he was growing in silence. How many times he would lose himself only to find himself stronger again. And each of those times, even from afar, I would be there. I knew I couldn't protect him from everything. Life demands its own lessons. But I also knew that I could be his safe haven, his invisible home, that place he could always return to at any age, at any time. I ran my fingertips over his tiny eyebrows, the perfect line of his nose, his half-open mouth that released sighs like silent prayers. It was unbelievable to think that such a small being had changed the geography of my soul forever. I closed my eyes for a moment and asked for strength, asked for wisdom. I asked for infinite love to get through each day that would come. I asked to be a good memory, to be a shelter on stormy days. I asked for him to always know that he was loved long before he was seen. The nurse came back, this time to perform the usual procedures. My arms refused to let go of him, but I knew it was necessary. I handed him to her as if I were handing over a piece of my own chest, and I saw his small body disappear beyond the door, taking half of me with it. Alone in that now silent room, I let the tears flow freely. Not of pain, not of sadness, but of a love so overwhelming that it overflowed without asking permission. It was as if each tear washed away the fear and left space for something new to be born. I took a deep breath and realized I was no longer the same. I would never be again. The woman who had entered that room with fear and uncertainty was left behind. In her place, someone was born who knew how to love more than she feared, that I knew how to fight more than I doubted. When he came back, wrapped in white blankets, asleep, I took him into my arms again. And there, looking at that serene little face, I silently promised, I will be the best mother I can be. I will make mistakes, I will learn, I will start over as many times as necessary. But I will never give up on you. I kissed his forehead with the delicacy of someone holding the entire universe in their hands. I felt his warm breath against my skin, and I knew, without a doubt, that all the love I needed to face whatever came my way already existed within me. The bedroom door closed with a soft click, sealing that little world of ours. A world where I was his and he was mine, where life began again full of hope, where each heartbeat was a silent declaration of love. I smiled, still through tears, feeling my courage slowly being reborn, like the sun rising in the sky. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew that, no matter what, that love would be the invisible thread that would keep us connected forever. He was my beginning and my new beginning, my pain and my healing, my doubt and my certainty. And above all, he was living proof that love is always stronger than fear. In the end, life is made up of these silent choices. To love, even when everything seems to be falling apart. To love, even with a wounded heart, even without guarantees. To love with the courage of those who believe in what can still flourish. If this story spoke to you in any way, leave a like, share your feelings in the comments, and subscribe to the channel to follow other stories that touch the soul. And if you want to continue this journey of emotions and reflections, check out the next video that we have left for you in the description. I'm sure it will also leave a deep impression on you.